this? Oh, Trump also at the summit decided to escalate strikes against Iran in his seemingly never ending cycle of talks, threats, escalation, talks, escalation, a crazy policy that seems to run in a loop. Just before airtime, Iran said it has shut the Strait of Hormuz. Ray McGovern is a former CIA analyst and a briefer of presidents, and Scott Ritter is a former U.S. Marine counterintelligence officer, UN weapons inspector, a pundit, and an author. And we're very happy to have Ray and Scott join us again on The World This Week. Ray, let me start with you. There can be little doubt NATO is serious about starting a direct war with Russia if it comes to that. What was your biggest takeaway from this week's NATO summit?
I guess the the array of missilery that was promised by the Europeans. The question is whether they can deliver, or whether then even Lockheed Martin can deliver anytime soon. and so and so when you look at the communique from the NATO meeting, you see exactly the same sentence that, or the same paragraph that led the communique from the Hague last year. No difference at all. It pledges fidelity to Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, which of course is attack against one is attack against all, but that's boilerplate. What we see is a disarray in NATO. We hear the Poles, for good reason, really resenting the resurgence of neo-Nazism in Ukraine. We see all kinds of fissures, and we see all kinds of difficulties with their economy. So it's not going to work for the Europeans. Now here's Putin looking on, and he's saying, "Oh God, I'm gonna have a lot more pressure to do something about these guys." So the first thing he says is, "Look, for every drone that goes into central Russia, we're going to have to expand our zone of what does he call it? Our our zone of a DMZ sort of. Oh, here he is. We have to expand the security zone that we have with Ukraine, but we also have to deal with Lavrov, Peskov, Simonyan, the head of RT, who are all saying, Vladimir Vladimirovich, come on. You have about 3 years to do what you need to do. Why don't you do it? Okay. So this came through in statements over the last year in Weltwoche, a Swiss magazine that had an interview with her. But the key thing here is Lavrov saying just yesterday in Mozambique, of all places, this: "We will no longer believe the West when it claims to want negotiated solutions." Get this quote: "Our reserve of goodwill and hope has been exhausted once and for all." Now, Ryabkov, his deputy, said that about 3 months ago, and he was sort of chastised. No, don't. The spirit of Anchorage lives. Don't do that. So we've come a long ways, and partly it is because the spirit of Anchorage has petered out, and the Russians no longer have any hope that Trump can rein in the Europeans, much less the Ukrainians. And so he's got to do something now. Or and one option, of course, is just to obliterate Ukraine, which I believe will be his first choice. He has the capability. He could do that now as an object lesson to others. But he may go further, and I'm inclining now to think that the pressure on him to go further and to give the European states, NATO members, an object lesson of what to expect, that pressure is increasing. And with the proper provocation, he may relent and hit one of these Latvian airfields from which is prepared for the firing of drones into deep into Russia. So we'll have to see, but that's how I look at the most recent developments.
Scott, in that interview that Ray refers to, Margaret Samaryan, who's the head of RT, said that Europe is destroying Russia. I don't know if she was literally meaning this, but I want to ask you, you were recently in Russia, you have insight to what's going on there. How bad is this gasoline crisis, for example? How bad are these drone and missile strikes on Russia? How big of a toll is it really taking on on the Russian economy, for example?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that it's having an impact on the Russian economy. The Russian president acknowledges it as much. Let's just be clear here. Let's put things in perspective for a second. Russia pounds the holy crap out of Ukraine on a weekly basis. When a Russian missile hits a Ukrainian target, it does so with thousands of pounds of TNT with precision strike ability. They're literally blanketing Ukraine, destroying everything of value. Ukraine still functions. All right. Ukraine's hitting Russia with mosquito bites. These little FP1 drones go in with minuscule little warheads. They set off fires that are rapidly put out. They do some damage. The damage is rapidly repaired. It causes a hiccup here, a hiccup there. Russia has a plan for all of this. Um, you know, all these lines you're seeing, yeah, you can take a day where there was a hiccup and people are in line. Come back in 3 days, the line's gone, the gas is there. Um, Crimea, there's a little bit of a pain. When I was in Melitopol, gas stations didn't function because there's drones everywhere. But we say there's drones everywhere. Well, look, I just spent a month studying Russian drone warfare. The Russians are kicking the living crap out of the Ukrainians. Okay, you're just not getting that on Western media. The Ukrainians are out there. They'll have a brigade. The brigade will have a brigade UAV command post. Each battalion will have its own separate command post. The Russians are killing all of these command posts on a daily basis. They hunt them down through pattern of life reconnaissance, and then they pound the crap out of them with bombs and missiles. They're slaughtering these people. It takes 4 weeks minimum to train an adequate drone operator. It takes 6 months for this drone operator to be combat effective. And the Ukrainians are putting their combat effective drone operators there, and they're being killed by the thousands, and they can't be replaced. No one's talking about this. There are no functioning gas stations between the front line and Kharkov today. There are no functioning gas stations in Zaporozhye. Why? The Russians have destroyed them all. So let's just deal with the fact that it's Ukraine that's dying right now, not Russia. I was in Moscow the day it got hit with 500 drones. The people of Moscow didn't even blink. Didn't even blink. I was in St. Petersburg the day it got hit with 96 drones. They didn't even blink. They don't care. I mean, they do. It's a pain in the ass. But the idea that the Russians are running around scared to death here, there, oh my goodness, the Ukrainians are hitting us with drones. We don't know what to do. These are people that suffered 27 million dead in World War II, and they honor this every year. They have memorials. They know these are tough, resilient people. I was in Melitopol for several days. They don't have electricity, they don't have running water, and they're not giving up. They wake up every morning, roll up their sleeves, and get to work. Talk to the soldiers. It's a tough fight. They're winning. That's what people tend to forget here. The Russians are winning this thing across the board. What we're seeing right now is one of the largest propaganda exercises in the history of propaganda exercises. The Ukrainians are slipping some drones through. When you fire 590 drones and 8 get through, you call that a success? You call that a success? It's unsustainable. And then the Russians counter by blowing up the drone factories and the drone assembly points and the missile assembly points. And they're exhausting Ukrainians. There's nothing left. And so what? Ukraine has this little gathering in Ankara, Turkey, where they suddenly are promised the sky. None of that's ever going to happen. There won't be a single Patriot missile ever assembled in Ukraine. It will never happen. We're talking about sending them PAC 3s right now. You honestly think that a PAC, there are no more Patriot missiles in Ukraine right now. They're out. They got nothing. They got no air defense. So the Russians are hitting willy nilly. There's nothing getting shot down right now. So what, the Ukrainians now are going to slip in a whole new air defense network under Russia's watchful eyes and establish it without the Russians hitting it? You think that's going to happen? You think the Ukrainians are going to build a 600,000 square meter factory to assemble Patriots and nothing's going to happen? It's over. Finished. It's a propaganda exercise. You have AI driven bots, sitting there spouting crap about Russia this, Russia that. There is zero panic in Russia today. There are some left wing liberal. I had an interview with one, Ksenia Sobchak. I mean, she hates the Ukrainian war. She despises what Russia's doing, and she's open about it. She is the distinct minority. The people of Russia today are 100% behind their president. People keep talking about the September 20th election and Putin better watch his back. What a frickin' joke. Putin's watching his back. Putin's leading the country to victory against a war that's not just defined by Ukraine, but the collective West. Germany, let me tell you why. I'm somebody. Look, I famously gave a speech in St. Petersburg. I said, "Shoot the dog," and I was talking about Europe. I said the solution is to shoot the rabid dog, and Europe is a rabid dog. Vladimir Putin came out the next day and gave a speech where he didn't even talk about the war. Why? Because he's not going to let this war define Russia. He has bigger things to worry about, like the future. $84 billion worth of investments signed at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Now, he gave in the question and answer period, he came out and was, very precise about the orders he was giving his military. You're going to win this war. Robote brate. Work, brothers. I mean, that resonated. That one sentence there woke the entire Russian nation instantly because they realized their president is behind the soldiers, and the soldiers ate that up. But Germany, yes, Germany published a white paper that talks about the inevitability of conflict in 2029. The German army today is what, 148,000 strong? Pistorius is talking about building an army of a little less than 500,000. And yet he had to come out and admit, we can't recruit the people. Nobody wants to fight for Germany. Nobody wants to fight for Germany. 60% of the German military manpower of military aid said, even if we're invaded, we're not going to fight. Germany's not the same Germany of the past. You have a whole bunch of warmongers at the top talking big. There's nothing. Rheinmetall signing contracts for missiles that will never get built because the economy is going to collapse. Every single German leader behind this buildup will be out of power in a year. The German government is collapsing. You think there's support for Merz? There's no support for Merz. And when AfD comes in and is part of a coalition, you think they're going to let this march to war? This is a self-cleansing problem. Emmanuel Macron, Le Pen just got cleared to enter the presidential race. Goodbye, Macron. You're finished. Keir Starmer, he's going to be replaced by who knows what, but whatever replaces him isn't going to last. There is no sustainability in Europe politically, economically, at all. NATO is a defunct machine falling apart as we speak. For all the hot air about NATO and this, that, and the other thing, the United States is still talking about invading Greenland. How's that going to go over with the NATO membership? And gosh, the last time I saw the United States said, we're not doing any business with Spain, a NATO member. Really? And the NATO membership is going to sit back and say, that's okay? The United States is now pulling out. NATO's got nothing. Europe's got nothing. There is nothing there. There is no threat from Europe whatsoever except this drone threat. And so the question is Vladimir Putin going to commit economic suicide by elevating the drone threat to more than the mosquito bite that it is? When you have an FP1 drone with 20 kilograms of high explosive go pop at an oil refinery and the fire's put out within a minute, is that worth changing the entire dynamic and algorithm of the winning combination you have assembled? People tend to forget the Russians are winning on the battlefield. There's not a single place where the Ukrainians have turned the tables. They're dying in droves. They're being slaughtered as we speak. And I no longer say it's tragic because I was in the Donbass. I had Ukrainian drones built by Google and by and guided by Elon Musk attack me personally. All right. I'm tired of these people. And you know what? The Russians are tired of them too. The day of soft peddling, oh, we're brothers, we're cousins, that's not being heard anymore. What's being heard is it's time for victory. It's time to get this thing done. Vladimir Putin's heard that. He's given the instructions to the military. They're doing a good job. I was a big believer that Russia was going to strike out against Europe sometime this summer. Not anymore. Why? There's no reason to. Europe is a joke. Russia's winning. The West just refuses to acknowledge it. Gilbert Doctorow is out there spouting his bullshit, as he always does. But Gilbert, why don't you come with me to the Donbass? I'll introduce you to some real Russians. I'll show you what real Russians do when they fight. And I'll introduce you to the people in Moscow, St. Petersburg, Ekaterinburg, Novosibirsk, Volgograd, and the rest of Russia that are lining up, volunteering to go fight in this war. You blow up an oil refinery in Omsk, all you did is guarantee that you're going to get 15,000 citizens from Omsk signing up to go to the front lines to kill all the Ukrainian bastards that are causing this problem. There's no sympathy in Russia anymore, except for the likes of Ksenia Sobchak, and I call her Princess Onegin. I think Ray might even get what I'm talking about there. Pushkin's, Prince Onegin, the Russian who wasn't a good Russian. She's Princess Onegin. So are all the other liberals out there who pretend to love Russia, but are really doing nothing more than trying to undermine Russia. These people don't count. They're mielich. They're nothing. The real Russians are there. Putin's not worried. Nobody in Russia is worried worth their salt. And that's where I'll leave it.
So if I invite Gilbert Doctorow and he agrees to come on with you and debate you, will you do it?
Face to face. I want to look him in the eyes. I want to make sure he shits his pants because I'm not going to let him sit there and do long range sniping. If Gilbert wants an interview, let's do it face to face. So when I look him in the eyes and I can tell, well, I'm an old human intelligence guy. I did interrogations for a living. I'll do it in a heartbeat. I'll do a long distance. I'll do a close distance. I'll do whatever he wants. But he won't do it. But I'll be more than happy to do it.
Well, I'm going to
Usually,
ask if you consider Zoom face to face, that's what I could
well, we'll do it.
arrange.
Yeah, but I'd really like to smell him after we finish the debate.
Well, we'll have to move this to Brussels then, I think. So what you're saying, Scott, is that Putin doesn't need to change really much anything at all. Does it continue with the war as he's prosecuting it?
Well, they will change their targeting. Look, and we saw that the Russian targeting again. Like, don't believe anything you hear in the West. The Russians have been very assiduous in their targeting to ensure that they only strike military-only facilities. They're very clear. All the damage that's being done to Ukrainian civilian targets are done either by Ukrainian air defense, and this is the primary goal. And this has always been the case. You go back to Israel in 1991. The majority of the buildings damaged during the Iraqi Scud attacks were damaged by Israeli Patriot missiles. That's just the way it is. Saudi Arabia, Patriot missiles. Here you have, Ukrainian Patriot missiles and other air defense missiles striking buildings and causing a lot of damage. Russia didn't do that. Or they shoot down a Giron drone and it crashes into a building. But Russia doesn't strike buildings with civilians in it. They just don't do that. But what you see Russia doing now is expand, because what the Ukrainians have done, and Trump actually admitted this. People didn't catch this, I don't think, when he said, the Ukrainians built a lot of drones. He said they're building them in basements and they're building them in. Really, President Trump? They're building them in basements. Well, yes, we know this because we have Ukrainian housewives put social media postings saying, I have a side gig. I produce drones in my own home, drone parts. And then we take them to the basement, we assemble them, and then trucks come and pick them up, take them to a warehouse where they're distributed. So you've turned all of Ukraine into one giant military production facility, which is, again, a violation of the law of war. Russia's given them a pass until this last attack. Russia, for the first time, is starting to strike the dual-use civilian infrastructure that's known. For instance, furniture factory. It's a furniture factory. No, it was a drone factory. It's a furniture factory repurposed as a drone factory. They blew up a hotel. Why? Well, you got a bunch of NATO guys in there, so you don't get to sleep for free anymore, NATO. And I think you're going to see Russia expanding the target deck this way, with far more precision strike against a far greater range of targets. They're hitting the locomotives. I think Russia, you'll see, will start taking out additional infrastructure, the rail network, et cetera. They'll start taking that out. But the idea that Russia is going to strike Europe, unless something really stupid happens, I'll give you an example. Let's say FP5 strike the Kremlin. That's sort of a game changer, I would say. That's a big deal. But Russia has built concentric rings of air defense around the Kremlin, around Moscow. You see things get through on the periphery, but you don't see things actually penetrate into the center of Moscow because they've got that place pretty well sealed off. But unless something like that happens, a direct targeting of the president or some sort of target of strategic infrastructure that actually creates an existential problem for Russia, I don't see Russia striking Europe at all. I just see them expanding the deck, and I don't see Putin changing much of anything. The economy is actually quite healthy. The economy is quite healthy. It could be healthier. It would help if there weren't sanctions. But the idea that the Russian economy is collapsing is absurd. Compare the Russian economic numbers with any nation in Europe. Talk about inflation and all this kind of stuff. The Russian economy is doing okay.
So, Ray, what do you think Putin's options are? Do you agree with Scott that he's going to pretty much continue the war as is?
Yeah, I pretty much do agree with Scott, which was not the case 4 or 5 weeks ago. Um, What changed your mind, Scott? Why do you no longer think that Latvia, for example, might be hit? Uh, is it your experience there with the confidence you've encountered, and what changed your perspective, as you acknowledged, in the last 6 weeks or so?
Well, the big thing was I was invited to St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. I participated in what I consider to be one of the one of the better panels, the one on international diplomacy. I had a deputy foreign minister there, the head of INGIMO, the diplomatic training institute. I had several professors from there, and I listened to them talk about diplomacy, and I gave one of my famous Scott Ritter overreactions, and I said, "Europe is a rabid dog. Russia should shoot the dog." It got a standing ovation from the crowd, and all the Russian diplomats were aghast because, my God! But then they loved it. And then the next day, I got invited to sit in the second row at the plenary session, literally paper airplane throw away from the president himself, and listen to him speak. And Ray, you know this because you're an experienced hand at this stuff. There's one thing to read the word, read the written word. It's another thing to watch a person deliver the presentation. And I watched President Putin deliver his presentation, and then I watched his body language as he received questions and he answered. And I saw one of the most confident, comfortable men I've ever seen in a situation like this. This is a man who said he's not going to let this war define Russia's future. That Russia's future will be defined by economic stability. He's trying to create a stable, effective environment for investment. He got $84 billion worth of investment signed during the couple of days at SPIEF. And then I started talking to Russians after, because believe it or not, my little presentation created some waves, and there was feedback. And then I went to the Donbass, and I don't know what I expected to see in the Donbass and Zaporozhye. I was supposed to go to Kherson, but it was just too dangerous. We got chased out of Melitopol because of the drones, not because the people who live there are scared. They just didn't want me to get killed, because it's dangerous. So thank you for those people who cared about me. But the point is that what I saw there in the worst situations, I'm talking about places where there's no gas, where there's no running water, there's no electricity. I didn't see a defeated people. I saw the exact opposite. And what I saw throughout Russia was just people who were like, you know, hey, if Ukraine wants a fight, okay, I mean, let's do this. But
Yeah.
the only people screaming about striking Europe are the people, and I don't mean to insult anybody, and I'm not, to Simeon and Solovyov and all these. They have their belief system, and they also have a business, and they business is to generate viewership, is to generate controversy, and so they make these statements, but they are very removed from reality, because the reality of the Russian government, I don't see any panic in the Russian government, none. I just don't see the panic. And it's not because they're ignorant. They know Vladimir Putin knows exactly what's going on with the energy. I've talked to the energy people. They're acknowledging there's some pain. There's some pain. It's not fatal. It's like getting stung by a hornet. That hurt. But now am I going to amputate my arm because a hornet stung me? No. Kill the hornet. Is there a hornet nest? Burn the nest down and keep on moving. And that's where the Russians are right now. The Ukrainians need to understand, and Europe needs to understand this. Russia has brought just a fraction of its military capacity to bear on Ukraine. There is so much more, and I'm not talking about nuclear. There's so much more that Russia can do that Russia's not doing. And what Ukraine is doing by going down this path is guaranteeing that Russia's going to do more. And this is why Vladimir Putin has made some amazing statements. I mean, if you're in a panic, why do you just basically say Sumy is a Russian city? Do you understand what that means? It means Sumy is a Russian city. It's not a security buffer zone. Sumy is a Russian city. It's going to belong to Russia. Kharkov is a Russian city. Odessa is a Russian city. Vladimir Putin said this for the first time. And people don't understand what this means.
Yeah,
And
that's the buffer. That's the buffer
no,
zone that I referred
oh
to
no, it's
before.
Russia, baby. It's Russia. This is
Well,
over.
right now, yeah. Okay.
Ukraine doesn't
Well,
understand what's about to happen to it. It's going to cease to exist. That's what's going to happen to Ukraine.
Do you think Putin wants that all of Ukraine would cease to exist?
Ukraine, as it currently configured, will cease to exist.
Yeah.
Denazification is going to be one of those brutally efficient purges of personnel that we've seen. I've spoken to too many Russians about this who are involved peripherally, at least, in the planning for post conflict Ukraine. The concept that a Zelensky government and anybody affiliated with Zelensky is going to be in a position of power when this war is done is a concept that's not considered in Russia.
Mhm.
Russia's actively preparing for post-conflict governance and will be done by the people picked by Russia. And if you are somebody that just again, Starbells, people need to understand. Um, in talking to people about Starbells, of course, the teachers' college that was hit, 21 students murdered in their sleep by Ukrainian drones who were guided to their targets by Elon Musk's Starlink. Um, the notion that this war ends and the people who launched that strike get to live, that's just not a reality. That's not a reality. And this is the reality for everybody involved in all of the decision making being done in Ukraine today. Budanov, dead man walking. Zelensky, forget about it. Syrskyi, до свидания. So, yeah, I think that what we call Ukraine today is not going to be how Ukraine looks when this is finished.
Yeah, this is exciting, Scott and Joe. This is the kind of exchange that would ordinarily occur in a healthy intelligence community where various aspects would be discussed in a very frank way and there will be come to some sort of conclusion. Now, I find myself playing the devil's advocate from where I was 5 or 6 weeks ago. But let me just say this. I too am impressed by Putin every time he speaks, every time he gives an interview. He's supremely confident. And for those who say, well, it might be a palace coup, well, we'd be the least, we would not be the first to, we'd see no evidence of that until it comes. When Gorbachev had that coup against him, I know I was surprised. Of course, by definition, a coup surprises everybody. Now, let me just point out why I think that it's a little different than I thought before, and why my views are much closer to yours today than they were then. Here's Putin talking, and he seems to be under some duress. He's talking about, look, we need this buffer zone, and we shouldn't be surprised by terrorist attacks, small scale, as the AFU continues to do this. Then he says, analysis should be continued of every instigator of continuing war in Ukraine, an analysis of the extent of involvement of each of them in actual combat. We need this analysis for possible responsible decision making. In any case, we may need this. Okay, so it seems to me is saying that look, don't worry about it. We got this, but we're actually going to be on the high alert here for intelligent indications that these Europeans are going berserk and exceeding what they're doing already. And then, of course, Simonian, Margarita, I actually know her pretty well. She's very, very close to Putin. And maybe it was just drama, but the Weltwoche, the Swiss interview, she did an incredible job. Um, but at one point, the Weltwoche guy, he does his best. He says, not bad. He says, no, Miss Simeon, um, what do you think? I mean, you say there's a lot of pressure that to do more to maybe hit out at Europe. What do you think your commander in chief should do? And she says, "Well, I'm not in the policy making circles, but I think he should move much more rapidly and much more aggressively." And the interviewer says, "But when?" And she says, "Shira." Russian word for yesterday, all right? So Yeah, this may be just a kind of a public display to say, look, Putin's under a lot of pressure and he could do this. But I agree with you, your bottom line, saying he's very confident. I think he's got a way to counter the Starlink stuff to mess up the electronics. I think the Russians now have their, you would know more than I about this, their own kind of Starlink fledgling program where their drones are also much more efficient. And you do see Putin just taking it in stride. So again, where you are now. It's just that there does seem to be some resistance. And if I were Bela Usov, let's say I was the defense minister, okay, and I see all these deals coming out of NATO, and I say to myself, well, okay, Ukraine's not going to build patriots, for God's sake. We can't. U.S. can't build patriots without 40 states being involved, you know? Okay, so that's not a work. But all this other stuff, my God. So are we going to wait another year or another 2 years? This is the time. I mean, what we do is before the what do they call it? The puritza, the the swampy season sets in September, we got 2 months plus. Okay, let's just finish the job, so then we can tell the Europeans, look, this is over. Don't forget. Don't even think of it. And U.S., thanks very much. But we're not gonna welcome Mutt and Jeff. Um, I mean, of course, the son-in-law and Witkoff, if they come here again, forget about it. Putin's not going to stay up till 3 in the morning listening to what they have to say. That's over. So there is the harder line by Lavrov. Um, Let me just say a word more about Lavrov because I think this was really very telling. This business about, well, we're not going to listen to you anymore because we don't trust you. Here it is. I'll just read it again. We no longer believe that the West when it claims to want a negotiated solution, this is good. This is big. Our reserve of goodwill and hope has been exhausted once and for all. That is, the spirit of anchorage is no more. Now, as I said before, Ryabkov, his deputy, got in trouble 4 months ago for saying that. Now that needs to be said, and they're tired of Trump because they can't depend on what he says, and they're not going to listen to Mutt and Jeff anymore. So I guess we come out on the same plane this time around, Scott. And thanks for sharing all your experiences there in Russia.
Not, on diplomacy. Yeah, I've come up with a new term, or I've absconded it, I guess. There was an article in Foreign Policy magazine a couple year 2022 post COVID that talked about hybrid diplomacy, but they were using it in the terms of virtual diplomacy, meaning that diplomacy is a face to face business and diplomats meet, but because of COVID, we couldn't meet face to face anymore, so we had hybrid diplomacy, Zoom diplomacy. Now, let's just call it virtual diplomacy. The term hybrid diplomacy I'm using is similar to hybrid warfare. We have a situation today where diplomacy is no longer what it was. I mean, because what Lavrov said is true, but Mutt and Jeff will be received in by the Kremlin. All right. So why? Because hybrid diplomacy means that everybody knows that everybody's lying, that nobody's negotiating in good faith, and that you're just going through the motions to get temporary moments of advantage. And look, we see this right now with Iran and in the United States. The MOU was hybrid diplomacy. Neither side expected this to last. The Iranians knew the United States was going to lie from the start, and of course, the United States are looking for any excuse to blame the Iranians. And yet, what they both did is, Iran sold 60 million barrels of oil, and the United States got its oil back up, and now they're back to in exchanging blows. Hybrid diplomacy. Russia and the United States. Russia knows the United States is lying. The United States has no intention of living up to it, but Russia's going to receive the American diplomats because they get temporary, advantage out of certain things happening. It's hybrid diplomacy. It's all bullshit. And that's what's happening right now. There is no real diplomacy anymore. It's just a straight up, warfare. Yeah, and that's what we're talking about here. This is literally general warfare. On Margarita Simeone, again, I don't know her like you do. I think I met her one time at a television studio. She was on a panel of people asking me and some other people questions. Um, and then we had a brief conversation, as I walked off the stage. I respect her, but you're right. She's very close to President Putin. And she's also has her finger on the pulse of the messaging that Russia wants. And
Right.
right now, I think that she and Solovyov have a job to do, and that's to make sure that the Europeans change their underwear every night out of fear that Russia may do something. But I don't think Russia's going to do anything. I don't, because what does Russia gain from it? I always the one thing that came out of this Russian trip was the question: okay, so Putin bombs Dusseldorf. What next? What next? And if the answer to that question isn't that Russia advances its strategic position, that Russia improves its strategic position, then Russia's not going to do it.
Mhm.
And so by striking Europe, all you do is create the opportunity. For instance, everything Germany's doing right now is going to collapse in the next year and a half. None of these factories are going to be built. All of these investments are going away. If AfD becomes part of a governing coalition, there will be no ATACMS production in Germany. There will be no Patriot production in Germany because Germany can't afford to do it. And it's bad policy for Germany. So, from the Russian perspective, why would you do something that suddenly causes the Germans to potentially rally around a government that's going away? And all
Or
you would do,
even, no,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. No,
No,
or
no,
even worse, raise the Article 5 provision of the NATO treaty in an
well, the problem with Article
unnecessary
5,
way.
yeah, the problem with Article 5 is the reality is there is no Article 5. First of all, every NATO member now coming out and saying, that doesn't mean we have to automatically respond. Have you guys read the fine print? I mean, when you got NATO members saying that, you realize they ain't going to be lining up. Two, okay, let's say they all said, automatic, we're in. We're in. With what? I still want, with what? What are you going to come in? Germany, what do you got? And the answer is nothing. They just had a former German Minister of Defense come out and say, we got nothing. There's
Yeah.
literally nothing. We've got nothing. The
Well,
French, they literally have nothing. The Italians, nothing. The British, I mean, not only nothing, they have a black hole that's just sucking their military into it. They get smaller and smaller every year. There is no Article 5 capacity in Europe because they've got nothing to respond. Even the United States has nothing. So
whoa, okay, that's where we differ, In other words, I think you have to look at Trump the way the Russians do, as incredibly unpredictable, mercurial, impossible to figure out what he's going to do. And given all you said, and which I agree with in terms of how the war is going, um, how it's really would be kind of here's Putin talking to his advisors, right? And he says, "Okay, now you say that the Latvians just fired some drones at us, Ukrainian drones from Latvian soil, and we warned them about that. Okay, now you say we should hit Riga, right? Uh, yeah, we should hit Riga, the capital of Latvia. That's a decision-making place. We'll hit it. Okay, what do y'all think?" Well, now you over there, you told me just last week that the psychological profile of Trump is that you cannot predict within any confidence what he'll do. Okay, so what do you think the chances are that Article 5 would be invoked by Latvia, and that Trump would say, "I'm in there"? What do you think? 5%, 10%, 5%. Too high, for God's sake. We're winning the damn war. Why would I want to do 5% or 10%? Okay. So what I'm saying here is that there is this attitude that in my view, Putin has deliberately and consistently rejected, that we should take risks that we don't need to take. The risk benefit thing is not in. It's stupid, and I'm not going to do it. Okay.
I
Now
agree.
against that,
I'm on your side
right?
100% on that.
Yeah,
100%.
well, I know. No, and thank you. But the other part is, here's Peskov. Now he is very close to. I mean, what he says is what Putin's supposed to say, and he's talking to the same Weltwoche uh, journalist, and he permits himself to say, you know, the notion that NATO would invoke Article 5 is crazy. They're not going to do that. Okay. Huh? Well, Peskov doesn't say things that matter that much off the hand. So, again, I mean, I see more signs now that Putin might be under some more pressure than I thought 2 months ago. And it's good that I hear you saying, no, no, you think he's holding fast. I think so too, but I am worried about Lavrov saying, "Look, you got taken in again." In effect, to Putin, you got taken in again. Okay, there is no agreement in Alaska, and Putin 3 days later says, "Oh yes, there is. There's an agreement, but we had an understanding." And Putin's, it's crazy. There are mixed voices here, and Alaska meant something to Putin, at least, and now it's lumped in with a deception operation by Lavrov, akin to the Istanbul Accords in April of 2022, akin to the Minsk Accords before that. In other words, hey, Mr. Putin, you're not going to take in anymore. We have given up. We have run out of patience with the U.S. That matters, but I don't think it really
Right, but there was a fine
impinges on.
there's fine print to that too. I think a statement came out either from the president or from Ushakov or somebody. We have no faith in the Americans anymore, but with Trump, we keep the door open.
Yeah,
Meaning,
and now even that is sort of eroded very much
right,
now.
but,
Yeah,
but this is what they call again hybrid diplomacy. Okay, that's what's being done here. This is just you're not shutting any doors. You understand that the Americans are lying. There's no faith about Anchorage anymore, nowhere. But they're not going to shut the door because there is momentary advantage that can be played. Because first of all, their their assessment of Putin or of Trump is that he is emotionally unstable. They didn't say he's
right,
insane. He's emotionally unstable, therefore volatile and unpredictable but that means that he can go any way on any given day. So what
right,
hybrid diplomacy does is it leaves the door open for that day when he suddenly goes, "Oh," because trust me on this one. Look what's happening with the Patriot missiles. They're already backing off. Now it's no longer we're going to build a factory inside Ukraine. It's we might ship some. Germany might build the missiles and then ship them in. But and so it's already backing away. And when he comes in Congress, see Trump spoke without doing any due diligence. So he comes back to Congress. How are you going to handle a lot of this technology transfer issues? Uh, you know, he doesn't have the answer to that, and he's going to run it, and he's going to get frustrated. And then what he's going to realize is Zelensky lied to him the whole time, and then he's going to get the real briefing from somebody. He's going to get pissed off, and he's going to go over here, and all the Russians are doing through hybrid diplomacy is making sure that the door's open when Trump changes his mind about Zelensky, so they can sit
yeah,
there and give Trump a chance to vent, and they'll take advantage of that. Meanwhile, nothing changes.
yeah,
Russia keeps doing what they do.
yeah. No, I think you portray the situation correctly. A small point: um, Mutt and Jeff, uh, Kushner and Witkoff.
Beavis and
Uh,
Butthead.
the last I that's better. The last I heard was when Ushakov did the readout of Trump's call to Putin about a week ago. And what was said there, if I recall correctly, was yeah, Kushner or the two envoys will come when we say they can come at the timing we. Now, do you think they're going to be allowed in the Kremlin again?
What I think is this. This again, this is my take on hybrid diplomacy. I'm trying to develop it into a paper, but it's a fast moving world. But I think this by that statement, they leave the door open. And so Trump is going to have a hissy fit in the near future. First of all, look what he just did. He's canceling all the Iranian contract and he's re-sanctioning Russian oil. At the same time, the Strait of Hormuz is just closed again. As we speak, the Iranians are sowing mines for the Omani corridor. It's done. And the Yemeni, the people aren't paying attention to what's happening in Yemen right now with the Houthi in Saudi Arabia. Um, and the Houthi are getting ready to shut down the Bab el Mandeb. Dmitry Medvedev accurately said that is the thermonuclear bomb. The Strait of Hormuz is the nuclear bomb. When they do that, 70% of Saudi oil that's been redirected to Yanbu and through Bab no longer gets to market, and we'll have a sudden energy deficit again. And Donald Trump's going to freak out. And then he's going to say, well, let the Russians sell all the oil they want and let the Iranians sell oil too, because we have no choice. He'll flip right back to where he was. It's inevitable. It's 100% guaranteed that Donald Trump is going to run out of Tomahawk missiles, run out of ATACMs, run out of HIMARS, and the world's going to run out of oil, and he's going to have to come back and re-embrace the MOU and re-embrace Russia. And when he does that, the Russians will say, hey, Mutt and Jeff can come and talk to us now. We got something to talk about. And they'll bring him in and they'll say, sit down and let's talk. And they know it's a game. They know that this is purely positional warfare, taking advantage of something, because they know in a month's time, Zelensky is going to come crying to Senator Graham, is going to go crying to Marco Rubio, he's going to go crying to JD Vance, he's going to go crying to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump's going to change his mind again. And the emotional instability will go back this way, and then it will no longer be convenient. But the Russians are going to play, it's just all a situational awareness game. This is what hybrid diplomacy is. There is no consistency because you're dealing with a fundamentally insane individual, or as the Russians say diplomatically, emotionally unstable. How do you deal with an emotion? It's what I talked about this in the past. And I said this to the Russians. I said, because they're like, how can we deal with Trump? I said, I don't know. How do you deal with bad weather? How do you deal with the weather? You wake up in the morning, you look at the sky, and you decide what you're going to wear. If it's going to rain, you have a raincoat, you have an umbrella. If it's sunny, you layer down. How do you deal with Donald Trump? Wake up in the morning and see what's going on and dress accordingly. And this is hybrid diplomacy. Every day is a new day. You just adjust to the stupidity of the moment from the United States. This is the antithesis of what the Russians want. Anatoly Antonov, I had a really cool discussion with him about, who do you want to see win the election? You want to see Trump replace Biden? And he said, we don't care. I said, really? You don't care? He said, no. What we want is predictability.
You
The
got it.
thing we love more than anything else is predictability.
Right.
You tell me what's going to happen, I can build a policy to deal with that. And then we
Right.
can implement the policy. What we don't like is unpredictable. I said, well, Trump is talking about he's your friend there. He's saying, yeah, but is he? Is it predictable? Okay, so he comes in. We saw from last time he promised this, but then he did this. And it's
Right.
impossible to build consistent policy when it's doing this. So
Mm.
the idea that the Russians wanted Donald Trump to win is absurd in the extreme. They were like,
Amen.
we'll take advantage of his proclivity to claim he wants to be, but we know he won't be our friend because we know past patterns repeat themselves. And this was the birth of hybrid diplomacy, where the Russians and this is what I had to figure this out because I was as frustrated as you are, Ray. I mean, because I'm looking for consistency in the Russians. I always look for consistency in the Russians. And suddenly with the Russians, I'm seeing inconsistent statements. And I'm like, what the hell? Why? Why are you letting Kirill Dmitriev go off and do tunnel diplomacy? Why?
Right.
Well, because you're playing hybrid diplomacy. You're simply dealing with an emotionally unstable, insane narcissist. And every day you have to wake up, look at the weather, and decide what's my diplomatic clothing for the moment. That's hybrid diplomacy. The Russians, I think, are mastering the art, just like the Iranians have. The Iranians have learned to deal with the United States by understanding that nothing we say is true. We are agreement incapable. But that doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you all the diplomatic doors. It means that every day you keep the door open, and when the chance comes, you jump on it. You get temporary advantage, temporary, this, and then you understand you're going back to what is in effect a permanent state of warfare. Russia understands right now, and you see this with Lavrov State, they're in a permanent state of hybrid warfare with Europe and the United States. This is the reality, and this state will remain until the causal factor is dealt with, and that's Ukraine. This is why the Ukrainian problem will not end in a negotiated settlement, because the Russians know that if they allow the cancer to remain, that the cancer will spread to Russia. They must excise the cancer. They must terminate the cancer, and the cancer is Ukraine. And if you do that, Europe collapses instantly. The only thing that holds Europe together, think about it. what's the one policy thing that glues Europe together? Ukraine. That's it. You eliminate Ukraine, there's nothing that holds this artificial entity called Europe together. In the United States, the only thing that keeps us going back to Europe is Ukraine. Eliminate Ukraine, and we're out of there. So I think the Russians right now are playing this hybrid diplomacy and understanding, though, that this is all about Ukraine and this is about terminating Ukraine. But in the meantime, take advantage of the fact that you have this extremely unstable narcissist who's bouncing back and forth. And when the opportunity is available, jump on it. Invite Beavis and Butthead in, stroke their little
Yeah.
heads, feed them some borscht and some caviar, and send them on their way.
No, there's a lot to hybrid diplomacy. I'll make a bet with you, Scott. Mutt and Jeff. I will be surprised, and I have a quarter, 25 cents to put to this. I'll be surprised if Mutt and Jeff are let back in the Kremlin, partly because Lavrov is feeling really shunted to the side. He and all his people have been kept out of these negotiations. Even Kirillov has some more influence in there. So I'll bet you 25 cents next time we talk, whether Mutt and Chef have gotten into the Kremlin or not. They're certainly not going to get back into Islamabad or Geneva or any other place where they're showing what kind of shysters, I mean, my God, shysters, swindlers, so the ones that sold the king the magic suit of clothes, all right? So that's a small point, but I thought I'd mention it. Joe, we haven't let you jump in at all. This
It's
is your
okay.
show.
I'm just enjoying the show. Go on. Carry on, please.
Well, I don't
Well,
know.
let me say this.
Yeah.
Peskov, Putin's spokesman, said apparently this week that it's no longer a special military operation. It's a war. Is there any significance in that statement, Scott?
Well, if it was said by Putin, because again, he caveated everything. In order for it to be a war, there has to be a declaration of war. I mean, there's legal things that have to happen for it to become a war. It's not war isn't declared because the president's spokesman says there's a war. The president would actually have to make a presentation to the Federal Assembly, and there would, things have to happen. But what he's saying is is pretty much what I said earlier. It encapsulated that this what's happening today is not what happened in February of 2022. We've seen a gradual transformation of this conflict. Because I mean, we knew. Hell, we had this conversation in May. Remember when I got in trouble for calling the $48 billion infusion of money a game changer, and I was accused of flip flopping and being the world's worst analyst? Well, it was a game changer. You inject $48 billion into a war, rebuilding an army that had been destroyed. It elongates this conflict. But you saw the West always sort of self-regulate. You remember the whole red line debate? We can't send Abrams tanks because that's a red line, could lead to World War III. We can't send F-16s. We can't send attack. Well, there are no more can'ts anymore. They're just doing. And I think this is what Peskov was saying: is that we're past the concept of a contained conflict. We are at the point where there can no longer be a doubt that this is a full-scale proxy war where Ukraine is providing the raw meat for a NATO-driven war against Russia. And it's a war of existential proportions. You parse out the statements made in Europe, and you have to understand that the goal and objective here is not just the economic collapse of Russia, not just the military exhaustion of Russia, but the societal collapse of Russia. They want a Moscow Maidan. This is the message that's being sent out over and over again by these AI generated bots that are dominating social media. Have you noticed what's been going on in Twitter? The flood of these new pro-Ukrainian bots that Elon Musk has elevated free of charge to dominate everybody's feed. They're all saying the same thing. It's all garbage, but they're all saying the same thing, and they're trying to create the impression that Russia's collapsing from within. And Gilbert Doctorow, of course, is trying to sustain this with his ludicrous assertions. Russia, there's literally zero chance that Russia's going to. This is not, August 1991 or yeah, 90. Was it 91? Was that it? 91, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
91. This isn't August 91. This isn't August 17th, 91. There's not a Banya session right now where the head of the FSB and the head of the SVR and the head of um, the are sitting there getting drunk in the Banya saying, "We've had enough, and we're gonna go out and declare an emergency committee right now, and Putin is we're gonna take care of that Vladimir Putin guy." That's just not happening right now. Putin's in full control. There's consistency of argument. The look at Gerasimov. Um, you know, look at Belousov. It's still a special military operation, but now the scope and scale is expanding. Um, the targeting is starting to take into account this is something that should have happened a while ago. Here I agree with Margarita Simeon. When? Sure.
Shut up.
But things happen when they're ready to happen. Um, the one thing that Vladimir Putin and the Russian Ministry of Defense have been very good at is knowing the temperature. You can't allow the water to boil. You can't let the pot boil over. You've got to be able to manage the temperature, and that means when you add the different you know components to the stew that they're cooking. Um, there's a time and place when things are possible, and what you have to do is let the other side set a precedent and then react. Now, normally this is a bad thing. Hey, Ray, you're familiar with the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act. And traditionally, we like to say that if you're inside the enemy's OODA loop, you're losing because, I mean, no, they're losing because you're the one driving the boat and they're
Right.
reacting to you. And so one would say on the surface that allowing Europe and NATO to act and then you react is you're on the wrong end of the OODA loop perspective, except it's the Europeans falling into the Russian trap. I'm becoming more and more convinced that what the Russians are doing is creating the opportunity for Europe to suck itself into a vortex that it can't extract itself from. Again, everybody's focused on the rhetoric coming out of Great Britain. 2030, war with Russia. Okay. But what about the other rhetoric? We can't buy any new equipment until 2030. How can you have a war with Russia in 2030 if you can't buy any new equipment? We don't want to talk about that. Oh, that's right, because it's just bullshit what you're saying. And this is the whole Russian point. They know that Europe is literally sucking itself into a vortex of self-destruction. But what you have to do, see, if the Russians reacted first, if the Russians led off and said, I'm taking the initiative, getting the European reaction, that as the Europeans get sucked into the vortex of self-destruction, they may actually prepare for this. They may actually say, we have to be serious about this. Right now, you have a bunch of politicians who go to Ankara and say things and understand that everything they said, there's nothing of substance to back it up. Nothing of substance. You talk about Article 5. How can Trump, in his best day, implement Article 5 with what? Other than nuclear weapons. And he's not going to do that. The 5,000 troops we have in Poland, you know that 5,000 troops gives you nothing on the bottom battlefield. The Russians have 700 and almost between 700 and 800,000 troops right now. 5,000 American troops is not going to change. First of all, they're not going to get to the front line because as they move from the Polish frontier to close with the Russians, they'll be destroyed by drone warfare that we're not even ready. Ray, I'm here to tell you, I saw it firsthand what the Russians are doing with drone warfare. I sat down with the units. I sat down with the research centers. I held the drones in my hands. I talked to them about the technology. Starlink is history. I think Joe made an allusion to that. The Russians have three different approaches to resolving the Starlink issue that I'm aware of personally. They're weighing decisions because there's heavy consequences. For instance, for shredding Starlink, that's one of their options. It can happen today. They can shred Starlink. It'll disappear. But that means there's a whole bunch of debris in space, and the Russians can't get their own Starlink up. It's a problem. There's something interesting happening right now. Starlink sectors are shutting down on the battlefield. The Ukrainians, where they once thought, say everybody's talking about, the Hornet. I interviewed Rogozhin. You know who Dmitry Rogozhin is, the former
Yeah.
Roscosmos. He now runs something called BARS Sarmat. BARS, BARS, is a Russian abbreviation for a reserve system of veterans who come in at like active reserve in the American military, and they form a military unit under the Ministry of Defense.